And we're continuing to follow breaking news out of Charleston County, where Sheriff's Office has officially released video of an inmate's death from back in January. Our crews, like we said, have been working throughout the night going through that video showing the death of Jamal Sutherland.
Now, Sutherland died in the Charleston County Jail on January 5th after being there for about 12 hours. This was after an arrest at the Palmetto Lowcountry Behavioral Health Center.
Caitlin Stansel broke down what happened in the footage. We want to warn you that some of this video is hard to watch.
Some of the first footage we have of Jamal Sutherland inside the Owl Cannon Detention Center starts around 8:19 p.m. on January 4th as he's being booked into the jail. We know he was taken into custody after a fight at Palmetto Behavioral Health in North Charleston, a psychiatric facility. And in this video, you can hear some of the bizarre things he was saying to law enforcement officers.
No! I love that gun. I love that gun.
What's going on, man? What you got going on?
The Illuminati is after me.
He tells officers he's superhuman. He's yelling, seems agitated. Officials say Sutherland was struggling with a mental illness at the time of his arrest.
No, this is not mental illness. This is a reality.
At least 6 officers then escort Sutherland through the processing room. He keeps talking about being superhuman and the Illuminati being after him.
Have you been here before?
Yeah, I've been here before.
Okay.
I'm a superhuman. The Illuminati is after me.
But otherwise, he does not appear to be resisting as officers lead him down some hallways. He continues talking loudly as he walks, almost rapping at one point.
I got a body of a Greek god, so guess what? My friends will get their face slammed in.
He then talks about being violent with someone, slashing throats and gouging out eyes. But an officer reassures him that he's going to be in a cell alone.
Well, right now, we're going to put you in a room to be by yourself. You don't have to worry about anybody, okay?
That's fine.
Okay.
About 7 minutes after he first entered the jail, Jamal approaches the cell where he would be held, and eventually where he would die after an interaction with detention center deputies just about 14 hours later. Even as the officer removes his handcuffs, Sutherland continues to loudly confess that he's being watched. But he's cooperative as the deputy starts to undress him,
Step out of your pants, please.
until the deputy asks him to sit on a stool and face the wall so he can change his shirt.
Face the wall. Gotta sit down, still face the wall. No.
I'm not doing that.
Why not?
I'm not doing that.
The video appears to show the deputy then forcefully moves Sutherland onto a bench, and Sutherland reacts, saying, "Is this how you treat the mentally ill?" At this point, it's hard to tell exactly what's happening. From this camera perspective, we do not see Sutherland again, although we can hear him. And the video ends as the cell door closes. According to the videos provided by the Charleston County Sheriff's Office, the next time we see Sutherland interact with detention center deputies is inside that very cell around 9:30 the next morning. I'm Caitlin Stansel. Back to you.
Our Live 5 Investigates team has been combing through the records of those 2 deputies.
One of the deputies involved in this case was named in a lawsuit a few years ago for using excessive force.
Lisa Wiseman tells us what we've learned about these 2 jail employees.
The 2 Charleston County deputies involved that morning, Detention Deputy Brian Houle and Detention Sergeant Lindsay Fickett. Houle has been working at the detention center since 2016. Fickett started there a decade ago, and in those 10 years, she's received awards and accusations. Fickett's personnel records claim that she is, quote, skilled at securing an incident and gaining control of a stressful event. But this lawsuit against several sheriff's office employees accused Fickett of strangling, assaulting, and using a taser on a female inmate back in 2014. It also says that Fickett's taser discharge was excessive force, lasting for more than 7 seconds, all while the woman was almost completely restrained. Fickett's personnel records also show she was accused by a supervisor of, quote, unprofessional, selfish, and unbecoming conduct last year. We haven't been able to find any disciplinary action previously taken against Brian Houle. He was actually given the Sheriff's Office Detention Deputy of the Quarter Award back in 2020. His resume says he was a rifleman in the Marine Corps years ago. Fickett and Houle have not been charged with any crimes related to what happened to Sutherland.
Now, this all happened back on January 5th. So why are we just now hearing about it?
Our Lowcountry Congresswoman tells our Carter Coyle it was a major failure of transparency.
Sheriff Kristen Graziano was sworn into office on January 4th of this year, the day before an inmate named Jamal Sutherland died in the Charleston County Jail. The sheriff's office sent this email to Live 5 and other media outlets that said detention deputies reported a, quote, unresponsive inmate who was pronounced deceased inside the facility. The email said, per protocol, SLED was notified, and per policy, 2 deputies were on leave, but there was no mention of tasers or any other force being used, nothing about the man being mentally ill.
That is incredibly misleading.
Representative Nancy Mace has been a vocal critic of how Sheriff Graziano is handling the Sutherland case.
This is not a time to learn on the job.
Live 5 tried to get the details as soon as we learned about Sutherland's death. On January 5th, we filed this Freedom of Information Act request for any video or reports about what happened. We got this report 3 days later, written by a deputy who apparently wasn't there when Sutherland died. His short narrative said that he was told an inmate failed to respond to resuscitation measures.
Yeah, to put out that report, and I'm just learning this for the first time, that was the first incident report that the sheriff put out. It is incredibly dishonest and misleading to do that to our community, and it's wrong.
Last week, 5 months after his death, the sheriff released this video that showed exactly what happened on January 5th. It seems Jamal Sutherland was clutching a spoon and refused to leave his cell for his bond hearing. Body camera footage showed 2 deputies tased him repeatedly and dragged him from his cell. Despite multiple medical workers trying CPR, Sutherland died.
But the fact that it took Sheriff Graziano almost 5 months to have a press conference on this horrific event that happened in the detention center that she leads this event is a test of character and a test of truth, and she has failed on both counts.
In January, the sheriff's office denied our request for video footage, saying it will not be released since it's an active investigation. We asked again in April. We were denied again, this time pending the SLED investigation. SLED also denied our FOIA request for their report in this case.
What was their response? It's a pending investigation? That's not a legitimate legal response.
Communication law expert Jay Bender says just because a case is under investigation does not mean that information and video and reports can't be released. He believes that excuse is used far too often by law enforcement agencies.
By delaying the release of the video and delaying the response to the incident, the sheriff only heightens the suspicion that there's a cover-up, that something's gone wrong inside the department and nobody's going to be held accountable.
Since last week, our investigative team has filed at least 10 FOIA requests with state and local agencies to continue investigating Sutherland's death.
It's very clear, the more that I learn through your reporting, and I appreciate your in-depth reporting on this issue, but the more that we learn, the worse it gets, and it's unacceptable.
For Live 5 Investigates, I'm Carter Coyle.
And in response to this story, the sheriff's office told us today the initial report was not the final detailed report, as the case was immediately turned over to an independent agency to begin an investigation. The deputies were directed not to proceed as SLED became the primary investigating agency.
The solicitor still investigating the Sutherland case to decide if any charges could be brought against those 2 deputies. New information tonight. Live 5 Investigates has obtained new documents from the Charleston County Sheriff's Office detailing why these 2 deputies were fired in the Jamal Sutherland case.
Sutherland was the 31-year-old mentally ill man who was repeatedly tased inside his jail cell in January. He died, and video from that day was released last week.
Our Carter Coyle found out those deputies weren't technically fired for tasing Sutherland.
Lindsay Fickett and Brian Houle, the detention center deputies at the center of the Jamal Sutherland case. They've not been charged with a crime. Both were fired this week by Charleston County Sheriff Kristen Graziano. Live 5 Investigates got copies of the deputies' termination letters. Sheriff Graziano says CCSO is continuing its investigation into the events surrounding the death of Jamal Sutherland, and that it's become evident that your continued employment at the jail at this time has resulted in extreme disruption of operations.
It seems as though technically they weren't fired for that tasing. Am I reading that right?
You're right. The sheriff has very deliberately chosen the language that she included in her letter.
Charleston attorney Amy Gaffney specializes in employment law. She says the sheriff has a unique position created by our state constitution. She's not a county employee.
The deputies are accountable to the sheriff, and the sheriff is accountable to us, the electors. And when you ask the legitimacy of her decision, whatever it is legitimate, except she can't terminate employees for any illegal reason, so because of their age or race or gender.
The terminations came 5 months after video shows the deputies pepper sprayed and tased Sutherland after he refused to leave his jail cell for a bond hearing. Sutherland's family says he was mentally ill. There's been public outcry and protests since the video was released last week.
We want the sheriff, as the electors who placed her in that role, we want her to make decisions like this based on thorough consideration of abundant information. We don't want her making knee-jerk reactions. This is a very serious situation. We're talking about a human's life. We're talking about the livelihood and employment of 2 deputies. So I don't see anything nefarious about the amount of time or the timing of this employment decision.
In the letters, the sheriff also says if the deputies are exonerated of wrongdoing, she'd consider rehiring them later. But for now, she says this action is necessary to restore order and ensure safety at the detention center. For Live 5 Investigates, I'm Carter Coyle.
As with the other public employees, there is a grievance process for deputies Houle and Fickett.
They can appeal the decision to see if their termination was appropriate.
New tonight at 11, hundreds of 911 calls have come from Palmetto Behavioral Health in North Charleston over the last 4.5 years. That was the facility where Jamal Sutherland was seeking treatment for bipolar schizophrenia when he was arrested on January 4th. Caitlin Stansel is digging into some of the possible reasons why Sutherland was taken from that very facility where he went for help. Caitlin?
Well, Ralph, North Charleston police say their officers have responded to at least 450 911 calls from Palmetto Behavioral Health's location since January 1st of 2016. And 17 people have been arrested at that facility in the same time span. I took a closer look at the reasons for some of those calls and learned more about some of the mental health resources inside the very jail Jamal Sutherland ultimately died in that were just beyond his reach. The 911 call from Palmetto Behavioral Health on the night of January 4th, 2021 is one of hundreds of others that have come from the facility's address over the years.
We do have to respond there on calls for service, like we have to respond when people call us. So that's just one location in the city that has a number of calls.
North Charleston police responding yet again to a facility that has called for officers nearly 250 times in just the last 2.5 years for incidents of sexual assault, missing people, violent mental disorders, and physical disturbances. That was the designation given to the incident that led to Jamal Sutherland's arrest. The outcome left to the officers who were called to respond.
That when officers respond to individuals in crisis and people with mental illness, the last thing that we want to do is put the person in a situation where they're not getting the treatment that they need. So the situation determines what the officers do in those type of situations.
But Sutherland's mother argues that the facility's 911 calls are just a way to deflect the care of their patients onto law enforcement. She believes Palmetto should have its own security to handle the situation.
North Charleston Police Department plays security guard for them so that they never needed to get any security in their facilities. Never had a need when I got a whole big police department that's gonna come pick up sick people. Why do I need to hire somebody? They should have had their own workers in there that could have said, you know what, let's get Jamal down.
And the choice to take him to jail was complicated because he was being taken from a facility that knew his history, his medical needs, and his illness like no other.
But inpatient hospitalization is the highest level of care that we have. So if someone does get out of control and they're unable to be kind of maintained there, and it gets to a 911 call, jail is kind of the only place left to take them.
We've learned Sutherland was flagged for his mental illness as he was booked into the Charleston County Jail, a notification that typically leads to a meeting with the jail's mental health team. But that help was just beyond his reach.
They did not meet with him. He wasn't in the jail kind of long enough to have them meet with him. But had we been asked.
Well, officials with the Department of Mental Health and the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council say that there are plenty of mental health resources for those in custody, as well as training opportunities for law enforcement and even some diversion options that could help many people dealing with mental illness avoid jail altogether. In the newsroom tonight, I'm Caitlin Stansel.